Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Leonard. What a lovely introduction. Thank you so much. In thinking about addiction and why people, intelligent human beings who want to live, do these terrible things to themselves that actually cut short their lives, devastate their health, hurt their families, cause them to lose everything. The stock answers in Western society come from two places, and the root of the answer that we give culturally to the question of why addiction actually rests on two separations that are actually untenable in real life. First, we separate the mind from the body. So we either say that it's coming from the mind and the person is making a bad choice, or it's coming from the brain because we have a diseased brain. So it's either the disease model based on brain pathology, which is thought to be due to genetics, inheritance, or it's thought to be just the wrong-mindedness of some individuals, so that they can separate the mind from the body. And it's either the body in the form of the brain, which is diseased, or the mind, someone makes the wrong choice. When you make a wrong choice, then the way people try to induce you to give it up is to deter it by means of draconian punishments, and there we have the war on drugs and all the terrible damage that is done to human beings in the name of this battle against drugs. And of course, it ought to be clear to us that there can't be a war on drugs because drugs are inanimate objects. You can't make a war, it's a war against people is what it is. This comes out of the idea that it's a choice. Now, the other separation that we make is between the individual and society. So we see the addiction as a problem of the individual, whether it's due to a choice in the mind or whether it's due to disease in the brain. It's an individual issue. We don't see the human being in context. Neither of those perspectives, whatever limited truth they may contain, can possibly explain the complex phenomena of addiction, or nor can explain anything about human beings, actually. Because human beings, it turns out, of course, live, are conceived in, develop in, and die in a context. So to understand the human being, you have to understand the context. And there's a Buddhist teacher called Thich Nhat Hanh who says the following about addiction. He says, because all manifestations have an individual and collective aspect, it would be incorrect to say that a young man in prison bears the whole responsibility for his crime. He's the product of his family, his schooling, and society. If we look deeply, we may find that when he was young, his parents often fought and caused each other and their child to suffer. Perhaps he was abused. Lacking love, lacking education, he tried to forget himself in drugs. With drugs, his ability to make good choices diminished even further. Committing a crime was the result. Looking deeply, we see that the conditions for this young man's actions did not arise from his own mind and experiences. All of us bear some responsibility for creating the conditions that led him to a cycle of crime and addiction. If we only condemn or punish him, it will not help. People use drugs because they're in pain and want to run away from life. Putting someone who's suffering like this in prison is not the way to solve the problem. There has to be love and understanding, some means of bringing him back into life, offering him joy, clarity, and purpose. This is from a Buddhist perspective. And this guy is no expert on addiction, but he understands human beings. And bringing him back to life, of course, is the issue, because this one client of mine said to me, somebody heavily addicted to cocaine and heroin, he said, I'm not afraid of dying, he says, I'm more afraid of living. And so the real issue in addiction is, why are people afraid of living? Well, if they're afraid of living, it's because there's no gene that makes you afraid of living. I just read the biography of Keith Richards, the Rolling Stone guitarist, who, of course, for a while was a very abject heroin addict. And he says that he's asking why, and he says it must have to do with the search for oblivion. He says the contortions you go through just not to be yourself for an hour. Now the question is, now why would not people want to be themselves, or why would they need to change the state of their minds? Only because they're suffering inside of their own state of mind. So the question you have to ask in addiction is not what's wrong with it, because we know what's wrong with it. All the things I've already mentioned: disease transmission and economic devastation and emotional loss. We know what's wrong with it, but the question we have to ask is, what is right about it? What is it doing for the person? What makes it so valuable to a person that they're willing to jeopardize all these other values in their lives for the sake of pursuing the addiction? Well, in other words, the question is, why are they so uncomfortable being themselves? Now, the image of the hungry ghost, my book on addiction is called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. An image is a Buddhist image. In the Buddhist cosmology, there are these 6 realms of existence. The God realm, where we're kind of transcendently spiritual happy, although we're not enlightened. There's the animal realm, which represents our drives, our hungers, our appetites. There's the hell realm, which is our terrible, unbearable emotions: rage, terror, fear. The Hungry Ghost realm is represented as being people with creatures who have large empty bellies, small mouths, and tiny necks, and they can never feed themselves enough because their bellies are too large and the way in is too small. And so they just haunt their world, always looking to be full from the outside, and they never can be. Now, the question is, what creates that emptiness? So that addiction is all about an emptiness that people experience inside. On one level, it's a sense of emptiness. And it doesn't matter what the addiction is to, by the way. That we have this myth, among the many myths around addiction, is that there's drug addiction here, and workaholism over there, and sex addiction there, and gambling over there, and heroin here, and alcohol over there. The reality is that there's only one addiction process, and it doesn't matter what the target is in terms of the internal dynamics. So it's the same psychological mechanisms, and the same brain circuits actually are involved, no matter what you're addicted to, whether it's shopping or heroin or cocaine. The same brain circuits are involved, and it's that same emptiness. Now, first of all, how do we develop that emptiness? Why are we so empty? To understand that, you can't look at choices and you can't look at genetics. You actually have to look at people's lives. And the reality of what happens is that we're not born empty. We're born with all kinds of potential. To the extent that the world is incapable of seeing us who we are, or validating who we are. And I'm going to read you a quote here from a spiritual teacher and psychologist who actually lives here in California. And he says, when a child is between 1 and 3 years old, being seen is a developmental necessity. So for him to develop properly, for her to develop properly, she has to be seen for who she is. In other words, as a full human being with value, with love, with strength, with truth. When we are not seen, we can only conclude that who we are is not good enough. So that our early sense of inadequacy comes from our parents or the world that we live in not being able to validate who we actually are. And to the extent that the world doesn't validate who we are, we lose parts of ourselves. Now it's interesting when you talk about the language of recovery. When you say people recover from addiction, what does it mean to recover? Well, the word recovery is very telling. What does it mean to recover something? What does it mean? To find it, to get something back. That means we get something back that's been there all along, we just lost sight of it. And what is it that people recover when they recover? Themselves. Exactly. In other words, the real question is, how did we lose ourselves? How did we lose ourselves? Well, we lost ourselves when the environment couldn't respect and validate who we were. Or worse, actually treated us badly. When we're not seen, we lose our sense of value, and it's like we develop a hole in its place, a big emptiness of something you experience as a void. And then we spend all our lives trying to fill that void. And you can fill it through work, you can fill it through drugs, you can fill it through television, whatever it is from the outside. You can fill it with religion, for that matter. You can fill it with anything. As long as you're looking for something from the outside to complete you, you're addicted. And as one psychiatrist said, that addiction is all about trying to solve our problem by the means of some external remedy. So it's all about external remedies. Now, of course, when people recover, what they find is that the answer has been there all along, right inside them. They just didn't see it. So the emptiness develops very early in life. Now, of course, there are grades of not being seen. Abuse is the ultimate way of not being seen, because when you're abused, your humanity is completely dismissed. When you're abused, you're not seen as a human being at all. What are you seen as? You're seen as an object. You're just an object to give somebody else pleasure, or to give somebody else a sense of power, or whatever satisfaction they derive temporarily from that act of abuse. But you, as a human being with your own feelings and your own validity, just doesn't exist. You just don't exist. So, needless to say, the more abused people are, the more likely it is that they'll become addicted. And of course, the large-scale studies here in California show just that childhood adversity and abuse is the template for severe addiction.